How are you guys? I hope you're fantastic and amazing. I'm back again with thermoregulation. See, this is the last process of this topic, right? So, thermoregulation is part of homeostasis. Remember, what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain a constant internal environment regardless of what's happening externally or what's happening in external environment or regardless of the changes that are taking place in the external environment, right? So what is thermoregulation? Thermoregulation is the body's ability to regulate or maintain a constant temperature regardless of the changes in temperature externally, right? So remember, the body is supposed to maintain a temperature of about 36.8 degrees Celsius. And if the temperature goes above that or below that, then the enzymes they become denatured, right? So they become denatured. By denatured, it means that they become inactive. And remember, what's the function of the enzymes in your body? Is to control all the metabolic processes in your body, right? Including cellular respiration, right? Including protein synthesis, including DNA replication, all of those processes that are taking place in your body, right? They're controlled by enzymes. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so humans are endothermic, right? Or you can say mammals because we're part of mammals, right? So human beings are endothermic. What does endothermic mean, right? What does it mean? So it means that it's animals that maintain a constant body temperature independent of the environment. So regardless of what's happening in the environment, they're able to maintain a constant body temperature, right? And what is that temperature? That constant body temperature is about 36.8 degrees Celsius. So the body is supposed to maintain a constant body temperature. Okay? We've already alluded to what thermoregulation is. So thermoregulation is the body's ability to maintain a constant internal environment when the external environment changes, right? So it doesn't matter whether it becomes cold outside or hot, as long as the body maintains a constant internal environment, right? Regardless of what's happening outside. So what happens when the temperature goes below, right? 36 degrees Celsius or it goes above? It means that the enzymes will be inactive or they will denature, right? Which will affect the or slow down the metabolic rate in the body. And if the metabolic rate in the body is slowed down, it affects each and every organ in your body, right? Each and every organ in your body is affected, or it will become even slower, right? So the processes within those organs will be affected, or they will become slower. Okay. Now let's get to the human skin, right? Human skin obviously is the largest organ in the body, right? Because it covers the whole body, so it's the largest. And also it contains thermoreceptors. I'm sure by now you should understand the function of receptors, right? So receptors, they convert stimulus into an impulse, right? Same as skin receptors. They receive the temperature stimulus and convert it into an impulse. And then that impulse is sent to the hypothalamus. Remember, in the nervous system, we dealt with the hypothalamus, right? And we recited its function. And we said that the hypothalamus is the control center for temperature, thirst, hunger, right, and etc. Right? So these thermoreceptors, they respond to both cold and hot conditions, right? And heat can be lost through various ways. So heat can be lost through evaporation. So what is evaporation? So evaporation is when sweat, right, is converted or turns water to water vapor, right? Because sweat is water, right? So it's when sweat turns into water vapor, and then that water vapor is replaced by cool air. So that's how the body is able to cool itself down. Does that make sense? So what is conduction? Right? So conduction is when heat is transferred between two objects that are closer to each other, right? So when two objects that are closer to each other, does that make sense? So it's when is lost, heat is lost through between or transferred, not lost. Let me just say transferred, just to make things easy. It's when heat is transferred between two objects that are closer to each other. Let me repeat that again. What is evaporation? So evaporation is when water turns into water vapor. And then that water vapor or that heat that's lost through evaporation is replaced by cool air. Right? Does that make sense? I hope that makes a lot of sense. Right? Okay, now let's go to radiation. Radiation is the opposite of conduction. So radiation is a transfer of heat between two objects that are far away from each other. Does that make sense? Okay, I'll go back to conduction. So conduction is when heat is transferred between two objects that are closer to each other. Whereas radiation, heat is transferred between two objects that are far away from each other. Right? So what is convection? So convection is when heat is transferred through the movement of fluid. Right? So heat is transferred through the movement of what? Fluid. Does that make sense? Okay, let me repeat that again. So evaporation, right? Evaporation is when water turns to water vapor and the heat that's lost through water vapor is then replaced by cool air. Let's go to conduction. What's conduction? Conduction is when heat is transferred between two objects that are closer to each other. Okay. Radiation. Radiation is when heat is transferred between two objects that are far away from each other. Right? Like for example, the sun. The sun is transferring heat to us, right? We are far away from the sun, hence we are far away from the sun, whereas we feel the heat that's coming from the sun. So it means that heat is transferred from the sun to us, right? To us, hence we call sun rays radiation. And also convection is when heat is transferred through the movement of fluid. Okay, I hope that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this is the structure of the skin, right? This is the structure of the skin. So these, let me highlight them. So these red and blue vessels, they're called blood vessels. So these are your blood vessels. They're the only ones who are not labeled. They're the only ones that are not labeled, rather, here. They are not labeled here. So these are your blood vessels, right? These are blood vessels. Also, we see here that you have your sweat glands, right? So these are sweat glands that produce sweat. And then sweat moves out of this tube-like structure. What we call this tube-like structure, we call it what? Let me just, let me just do this so that you're able to see clearly. We call it a sweat pore, right? So, ish, this thing doing now. Okay, so this is our sweat gland, right? Sweat gland, and sweat will move out of this tube-like structure, then exit through the sweat pore. So this is the sweat pore, right? Okay. Our next structure that's important for us to know is our follicle, our hair follicle. Can you see our hair follicle? Right? Then within our hair follicle, we have hairs coming out of the skin, right? hair is coming out of the skin. So this is our hair follicle, and inside our hair follicle we have hair, right, coming out of our skin, right? Okay, and there are two parts. So the skin is divided into three parts actually, but you need to know these two parts. So we have the epidermis, which is the top layer of the skin. In the middle layer of the skin, we have the dermis, right? So this is the top layer of the skin, which is the epidermis, top layer of the skin, yeah, and the middle layer of the skin, which is what? Dermis, right? And also you can also include the third one, which is the bottom layer of the skin, your hypodermis, your hypodermis, right? Okay, let's just do this. Do this. Okay, so this is the structure. You're supposed to know the structure of the skin, right, by head, so that when you go to your exams, you're able to label the structure, right? So here we have our erector muscle. Also, you're supposed to know your erector muscle. It's very important that you know the erector muscle here, right? That is just close to your blood vessel, right? So I hope that that is clear. I hope that is clear, right? So I don't want to get into a lot of structures that are not examinable, right? Also, another thing that's examinable is your adipose tissue here, right? So this fatty, right? This fat here, it's like a fatty tissue. It's called the adipose tissue, right? It's called the adipose tissue. So you're supposed to know those structures. It's very important for you to know those structures so that you're able to label them, right? Sorry about the noise in the background, right? I hope you can hear my voice. Now let's look at thermoregulation in a cold and hot environment, right? So how does the skin change with regards to a hot and a cold environment, right? I hope you can see very clearly. This is a structure that summarizes the whole process of thermoregulation. As we've alluded to it, that the hypothalamus, right, is the control center for temperature, right? So this part, right, is the control center for temperature. It's the control center for temperature, right? So what happens to the skin whenever it's cold? I'll just provide you with a summary before we get into the process itself, right? Okay, so what happens when it becomes cold? So what happens when it becomes cold? Thermoreceptors, right? They receive the stimulus, right? They convert it into an impulse, and that impulse is sent to the hypothalamus, right? Remember the receptors that are in the skin called thermoreceptors. So they convert the stimulus and convert it to an impulse. Then that impulse is sent to the hypothalamus, right? That impulse is sent to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus will send, right? It will send impulses to the blood vessels, right? It will send impulses to the blood vessels, right? And also your sweat glands. And then what will happen to your blood vessels? Then your blood vessels constrict, will constrict, right? And they will move away from the skin. So they will constrict. Blood vessels, as you can see here, what's happening with this thing? As you can see here, the blood vessels have constricted. So it means that they become narrower, right? Inside, they become narrow. So they constrict, right? So it means less blood will be sent to the surface of the skin, or less blood will be sent to the skin, towards the skin, not to the surface of the skin. So less blood will be sent towards the skin because the blood vessels have constricted, they have become narrow, right? And what will happen to the sweat glands? So it means that the sweat glands will become inactive whenever it's cold. So it means that there will be no sweat that will be released whenever it's cold, right? And if no sweat is released, then there will be no heat that is lost in the body, right? And that will allow your body to warm up. Okay. Now let's look at hot temperatures. What happens during hot temperatures? So during hot temperatures, what happens is this: your thermoreceptors, right? They receive the stimulus, convert it into an impulse, and then that impulse is sent to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus will then send impulses to the blood vessel, right? And the sweat glands. And the blood vessels will start to dilate. As you can see, they've dilated here. Dilating means that they become wider, right? Why do they become wider? In order to allow more blood to move closer to the surface of the skin, right? Let me just use that, to the surface of the skin, because I think it's correct to phrase it like that. I don't think that you'll be penalized in any way, right? Let me just phrase it like that. So it will move so that more blood moves to the surface of the skin, right? And if more blood goes or moves to the surface of the skin, it means that more heat will be lost, right? It means that more heat will be lost from the body, right? And when more heat is lost from the body, and the body is able to maintain a constant internal temperature of 36.8 degrees Celsius, right? And also what happens to the sweat glands? So the sweat glands, they'll produce more sweat, and that sweat will be, right, obviously transported of the skin, outside of the skin, and that sweat will be lost through evaporation. And when sweat is lost through evaporation, it is replaced by cool air, right? It is replaced by cool air in order to cool the body down. I'm sure you've noticed that whenever you sweat, after that, your body tries to cool down because it loses its heat through what? Evaporation. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so this is just a summary. Let me just summarize it again in terms of this diagram, right? As you can see here, no heat is lost whenever it's cold, so no heat is lost. But when it's hot, you can see that heat is lost through the surface of the skin, right? So look at the sweat glands. So the sweat glands, they're inactive whenever it's cold, so they're not releasing any sweat, right? But when it comes to cold, hot conditions, so your sweat glands are active, so they start to produce a lot of sweat, and the sweat evaporates, right? And then that evaporation, or that heat that evaporated, is replaced by cool air. Okay. Okay, now let's do this. Okay, I was just providing a summary of thermoregulation. Now let's get into the actual process in terms of what happens whenever it's hot, right? When the environment becomes hot, right, the body temperature increases. And when the body temperature increases, warm blood passes through the hypothalamus, right? It passes through the hypothalamus. Then the hypothalamus will then send impulses to the blood vessels of the skin and sweat glands. Then the blood vessels will dilate. Remember, dilation means that the blood vessels become wider, right? And when the blood vessels become wider and more blood moves, it means that more blood will move closer to the skin because the blood vessels have dilated. So, what do we call a process whereby blood vessels dilate or blood vessels become wider? We call that process what? Vasodilation. Right? It just means that blood vessels they become wider, right? And the sweat glands they get activated, so they become more active and they start producing more sweat, right? And when they produce more sweat, that sweat is taken to the outside of the skin, then that's where it will evaporate and then replaced by what? By cool air. And it will be replaced by cool air, right? Then the surface blood capillaries will lose heat and the body will start to cool down, right? Now let's move to a cold environment. So what happens when the environment becomes colder? It means the body temperature decreases, right? And the cold blood or colder blood passes through the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus will then send impulses to the blood vessels in the skin and the sweat glands. So what happens to your blood vessels? Your blood vessels will start to narrow, or they will start to constrict. Constriction means it's narrowing, right? So they'll start to narrow. If they're narrowed, it means that they won't allow more blood to move to the surface of the skin, right? And this process we call it what? Vasoconstriction. So what is vasoconstriction? Vasoconstriction is when the blood vessels become narrower, right? Or if they constrict, means that they constrict. So that is vasoconstriction, right? And if less blood moves to the surface of the skin or flows to the surface of the skin, it means that less heat will be lost outside. So less heat will be lost outside, right? And remember, your sweat glands, whenever it's cold, they become inactive, right? It means that they're not producing any sweat. And if they're not producing any sweat, it means that there'll be no evaporation of sweat, right? Because there is no sweat to evaporate, right? Then heat is not lost, which leads to the body warming up. Right? So this is the process of thermoregulation. You can rewind this video over and over again if you don't understand it. Just listen to me over and over again, right? So this is thermoregulation. It's just a continuation of the lectures that I've already put out on YouTube, right? So I hope this is clear. It's just a short video, so it wouldn't take you even uh, 30 minutes to listen to it. So thank you guys.